if you had to keep in mind only one positive aspect of a COVID-19 pandemic, what would it be? Some of you probably think, how dare she use the term positive and COVID-19 in the same sentence? And they're kind of right. But for me, it allowed us to put our attention on a very important topic, mental health. Did you know that mental disorders were one of the first leading causes of disability in the world? Because personally, before I started to work on the topic, I didn't. My name is Candice. I am a master's student at the Douglas Institute in the McGill Group for Society Studies, and in this talk, I want to present you the purpose of my researches, which consist in studying a particular type of neuron in two mental illnesses, depression and schizophrenia. But before to tell you more about what is this mysterious neuron I am interested in, I want to first take a moment to talk about mental disorders and show how important it is to investigate about them. Mental disorders have huge consequences on the daily activities and general behavior of the people they affect. It impacts their social, psychological, and economic life. In both depression and schizophrenia, there is a range of symptoms. And just to give you an idea, in depression, the symptoms consist in a mood disturbance that can be coupled with a lack of hope, of self-esteem, a deep feeling of sadness, and even suicide ideation. In schizophrenia, the symptoms can go from hallucination to a disorganized speech or behavior, some difficulties to concentrate, and there is even a syndrome called catatonia, which consists in a mental stupor and muscular rigidity. How to keep having a fulfilling life socially or professionally with all of those symptoms? 10% of the people suffering from schizophrenia die by suicide. And 50% of the individuals dying by suicide had previously received a diagnosis of depression. Mental disorders don't only reduce the quality of life of the individual they affect, but also their lifespan. Even if their perception in society is improving over the time, the patients suffering from schizophrenia and depression and all of the other mental disorders still to be victim of discrimination and stigmatization. And in the society, the severity of mental disorders tends to be considered as inferior in comparison to other illnesses. But the reality is that they all require an adequate medical assistance. And here is a sad example. 800,000. This is the number of people that died from a liver cancer in 2020. But this is also the number of people that died by suicide every year. Mental disorders are deadly illnesses. For those reasons, patients need treatments. And you already have treatments. But the thing is that a part of the patient doesn't respond to the treatment, and another part presents a resistance over the time. For those reasons, we need new treatments. But in order to find new treatments, we need to understand the mechanisms involved in those illnesses. And in the case of depression and schizophrenia, the famous neuron I study could be involved. This neuron, the von Economo neuron. What a fancy name! von Economo. It comes from their founder, Konstantin von Economo, an Austrian neuroscientist that discovered them in 1929. Von Economo neurons also have nicknames. We can call them VENS as an abbreviation for von Economo neurons, or spindle neurons because they have a characteristic shape. In our brain, there is 100 billion of neurons that we can divide in 200 different types that have all their own features. And von Economo neurons are one of those types. Now, why I keep telling you this neuron is mysterious? Von Economo neurons haven't been studied so much in comparison to the other neurons. But from the few literature we have, we know that only a small number of species have von Economo neurons in their brain. And all of those species present some social and emotional abilities. We can cite raccoons, elephants, great apes, and humans. In humans, the von Economo neurons are not present in all the brain. They are specific to 4 regions only. And those 4 regions are involved in, again, social awareness and emotions. And we can cite social bonds, guilt, embarrassment, or again, empathy. And another interesting fact is that those functions are highly impacted in mental disorders, and that those same regions are also impacted in mental disorders, including depression and schizophrenia. Finally, the von Economo neurons naturally overexpress some specific genes that have been linked to depression and schizophrenia. So an alteration of the von Economo neurons could have a link with depression and schizophrenia. And this is exactly the question I want to answer at the end of my master. Is there an alteration of the von Economo neurons in depression and schizophrenia? I am interested in 2 types of alteration. An alteration of number, the density of the von Economo neurons, and an alteration of their shape. And those 2 alterations have a very huge importance, since they have the power to highly impact the circulation of the nervous message between the neurons. Now, to give you a visualization. Imagine that you're driving a car on a road. The roads are similar to neurons, and the cars are similar to the neuronal message. Now, the fact that the cars go from one point to reach a specific destination, this process is similar to the neurotransmission. And the von Economo neurons are kind of highways. They are way bigger than all of the other type of neurons, and they enable a fast neurotransmission. Now, let's imagine that the number of roads is reduced. It will be more complicated for a car to reach his destination. And if we imagine that now instead of having large and straight roads, we have some very small and sinuous roads, it will be complicated as well for cars to reach their destination. And this is exactly this way that the neurotransmission can be highly impacted if the morphology, the shape of neurons, or their density is impacted. In my researches, I compare the von Economo neurons from people suffering from schizophrenia or depression with the von Economo neurons from people that have healthy brains. How to do that? I work with post-mortem brain samples from donors. When people hear me talk about my job for the first time, tell me, "Oh my God, you cut brains. Isn't it disgusting?" But the reality is very far from zombie movies. The sample I work with are dissected by virtuoses of brain dissection. They separate the different structures of the brain, so the researchers only work on the sample they need to work with. When I receive my samples, they are tiny pieces of 1 centimeter length, like very little cubes, and there is no blood. Once I have my samples, I cut them in very thin slices, like 0.05 millimeters of thickness. To give you an idea, it looks like cherry blossom petals. Very far from the zombie movies, right? Then, when I have my little slices, I do a series of chemical reactions that will enable me to stain the von Economo neurons. And once this staining is done, I go to the microscope and I am able to see them. And here is an example at the end of the red arrows of the von Economo neurons seen under a microscope. Circled in green are the other neurons. And we can see that the difference between the von Economo neurons at the end of the red arrows and the other neurons circled in green is that the von Economo neurons are so big. We can also notice their particular spindle shape. So, thanks to the microscope, I will be able to determine the density of the von Economo neurons in healthy subjects in comparison to patients with depression or schizophrenia. And using 3D reconstruction, a specific software will help me to analyze every morphological features of the neurons and make comparisons between those different groups. This way, at the end of my master, I will know if von Economo neurons are disturbed in morphology or in number, in depression and schizophrenia in comparison to healthy subjects, depending on the region in which they are found. If I had to deliver only one message, it would be that mental disorders come from real physical brain disturbances, and that it is crucial today to keep finding new treatments and providing supports to the patients suffering from mental disorders. This is the aim of my researches and the heart of our scientific community. Thank you for your attention.